Hello and welcome to another edition of ALN Thursday at 3. This is the beginning of a very special two-part series of programs with our colleagues at the United Nations, Daniel Platz, the Senior Economic Affairs Officer there, and Linda Newton, who is a consultant and was heavily involved in the handbook that we've been telling you all about for a long time now. And before we get to them and let them talk more about themselves and their background, we want to thank our members, our Platinum organizational member, Onuma Inc., and our patron members, Jacobs, ABS Quality Evaluations, Definitive Logic, CGI, and all of our organizational members who make this type of programming possible. And we thank all of them for their support. And we like to talk about what's coming up next week. And next week it's the UN again. So we're really happy to be promoting the excellent work of the United Nations. And we call you the asset management team. I don't know what the official title is, but Jim Dieter made us aware of this team and the work that they've done. And Jim has said that this framework that the UN has created is as good as or better than ISO 55000. So that's high praise from one of the authors of the original ISO documents. So we welcome you. So the way we like to start our programs is by asking, how did you get started on your journey in asset management? And it seems like nobody went to college to be in asset management. They just got there. So Daniel, if you could start, and then we'll go to Linda.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Mike. I'm sitting outside on my terrace, working from home today. If the chimes are ringing too loud in the background, let me know and I'll move inside. But
no, we don't hear them.
Relaxing. So yeah, as you rightly said, I did not go to school to become an expert on infrastructure asset management. I realized that it's just a very, very important field way into my career at the as an economist. I've dealt a lot with issues of development aid effectiveness, of poverty eradication, of macroeconomic stability. But I always had a thing for municipal finance, for local government challenges. And so some time ago, we started working more and more at the end on local finance, on the financing challenges that cities have. And more we thought, that a crucial, piece is missing there, a crucial piece of the puzzle is missing. And that is, what some have called municipal asset management, but what is more relatable when it's called infrastructure asset management. That is, how do cities all over the world, small, big, or provincial governments even, how do they make sure that their assets, their infrastructure assets that they own or that they manage keep on working and maximize the service and financial value of that over time? And I just realized, that there's just not a lot being done in the UN, or nothing being done in the UN on that. And really just, went to Google, and that's how I found Linda. And Linda has much more expertise than I do. We have a great working relationship now since 2017. So she's really the brain behind much of this. So I would, give it over to you, Linda, and maybe talk about
perfect transition. Excellent. Linda.
Oh, well, thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Mike. It's we've been talking about this for several months, so it's very exciting to finally be here and connecting, on the ALN on Thursdays. I've been involved in asset management all my life. It's just never called that. And I think anybody sort of my vintage, if you go back and you ask us, we may say the same story, but I started out in the Canadian Army as a military engineer very long time ago, and working in the construction engineering sections. And as it was in the day, and still is, it was never money for new stuff. It was always money for maintenance, and maintenance was always what grabbed me. And so I just carried that interest through all my life. When I left the military, I went back to university and still looked at military infrastructure and how do we keep it going and how do we look after it over its life cycle. And Daniel's heard this joke, but it's true. I started out looking at everything as a generalist, and then I looked at roads and I looked at buildings, and then I went to our National Research Institute and looked at sewers, and then decided it was time to come back above ground. So I covered this whole range of infrastructure almost by accident, but it's been my passion. And so I just carried on with that. And of course, now the field of asset management emerged, which when I started doing my research, it wasn't called that. You're trying to figure out where do you fit in the field of engineering when there's no asset management faculties. So when Daniel—
What was your degree? What was your degree in when you went back?
My first degree was math and physics, but my graduate degrees are civil engineering, construction engineering.
Okay.
So I was just always involved in construction and maintenance.
So it sounded like you were about to start with how you and Daniel got connected and started with.
Yeah. So it was quite funny because I just my husband had just retired, and I thought I don't really want to work a day job anymore. I'd like to be consulting, so I've got a little bit more control of my time. And I started consulting, and I got this email out of nowhere from the UN, and connected with Daniel. We had a chat, and he said, "Yeah, this is the project." And I was excited because I do a lot of traveling to developing countries, and it's just worked really well from there. It's just been a phenomenal project. My passion's about simplifying asset management, and how do you take what are sometimes put as complex concepts and simplifying them so that people get it, and realize that it's not a big thing. It's no different than what you do to your house or your car or your motorbike, just how do you just apply those to our public assets? So it's, as you can see, I'm just, it's a really boring topic for me.
So Daniel, what got you interested in deciding to go with the handbook? And I've just put the link to it up in the chat. Oh, and I forgot to say, anybody with questions can put them in the chat or put them in the question and answer section. We welcome all kinds of input.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Mike. Glad you put the link to our website there. I hope it's working today. It's not always reliable at the end, but I also have a few slides, but I understand we'll keep it informal at this stage. Just let me know if you want me to visualize anything. I'll be happy to do that. The handbook really happened later on. So, to be perfectly transparent, it's all started with a book I was reading by the World Bank on municipal finance. They brought out in 2011 a handbook on municipal finance, which, as I said earlier, I know is a very, very key issue also at the UN now. There I just found a chapter that really, grabbed me on municipal asset management, really arguing that this is neglected, that it is a big surprise, even if you think about the fact that it's changing, but back then at least, almost no local government in developing countries has asset management focal points. Actually, in a lot of developed countries, you won't see that, right? And there is a strong finance link to that as well, right? Because we always use some numbers, and one number that is very catchy for people to hear when I try to sell that project is that I always say, you all talk about finance and infrastructure finance and moving from billions to trillions to fill that big infrastructure gap all over the world. But did you know that most of the finance or most of the funding is needed once it is built, after it is acquired, right? So 75 to 85% or so, I think the Institute for Asset Management estimates. So it's a core financing issue as well, right? If you don't do it well, you really end up paying a lot, or the services break down. And then you have all these not only cost savings, but also financial benefits that come along. So I focus on finance right now, and Linda and I will always argue how much finance is part of asset management and how much emphasis it should get. But where I'm coming from, I'm coming from the sort of the development finance portfolio at the UN, And, I've been arguing consistently that, infrastructure asset management has to be integrated into that if you want your development finance to be sustained and, have a long-term impact. If you don't do it, you might succeed in building a project, but it will just deteriorate and break down. And what do we do to stop that, right? How do we teach local governments to manage it more sustainably, to find new roles as asset managers within a team? So I always try to sort of highlight this financial component. Now, what is even bigger than that is, of course, the service benefit, right? I mean, everyone sees in a local town, in a local government that, if you're working for it, if your public infrastructure works better, you have a much easier life. There will be no demonstrations in front of your town hall because, the water supply is not working, or the waste is not being picked up. So the immediate benefit of functioning infrastructure is very evident, but we're also really trying to say that there's a very, very close inherent link to the bigger economic finance development discussion here that we have overlooked for many, many years.
So you embarked on the handbook and involved a lot of people. You referenced the Institute of Asset Management and their excellent structure. Linda, can you tell us what happened after the handbook came out and how you started to spread the word about it?
Yeah, so the after the handbook came out, it was sort of just as COVID was hitting its stride, and it became the impetus for us to do several workshops, online workshops. We had 3 regional workshops, one in Latin America, one in Africa, and one in Southeast Asia, using the handbook as that guideline. And we got really good feedback on the handbook because of the language, because it was so simple, and it was sort of in that conversation of let's just have a chat about asset management and kind of demystify it. So it certainly helped Daniel to get a broader appeal to the project and secure funding that we could expand the project beyond our initial 4 countries that we got involved in. And it it allowed us to add, bring another chapter, such as the data chapter, which is great, and public health. That was when we were first doing the storyboarding for the handbook. It was just before COVID, and that wasn't even in the wheelhouse. And then we thought, how can we show that we can pivot what we're doing to something like a public health emergency like COVID? So it's been now that handbook has become the sort of the textbook, if you like, for the workshops that we do, and we just keep building on it and getting people engaged and using the exercises. It became the basis for the online course that the MOOC through it's Uniterra, I think, isn't it, Daniel? Is the United Nations organization that the MOOC is through.
Yeah, exactly. And if you click on that link that Mike put in the chat, there, you scroll down a little bit, there are different icons, and one should say MOOC. It's completely free. It's a quite extensive, course that really, visualizes the entire handbook. So the handbook is so good, and I can say that because I didn't write it. Linda wrote most of it. I only. She's done, especially the first half of it's done such a clear job in terms of sort of moving from step 1 to 2 to 3 and really simplifying things, that we really just had to give the handbook to a fellow agency at the UN and say, hey, please turn this into an online course. And that's all they needed, like they hired, a video editor, a professional moderator, and it's just all there. It's really, I think, in addition to just really, being an interesting topic and capturing it well, I think the major contribution of that is really it is relatable, and it uses very, very direct, simple examples taken from our own field work, actually, that we've done before, that our local government officials in our project countries can easily relate to.
So what are some of the project countries that you've worked in?
Yeah, so we usually, our development work tries to focus on those most in need, right? So there was a focus on mostly LDCs. The LDCs, the term at the end means not lesser developed countries, but least developed countries. So it's a group of some 42 or so countries that have been classified as especially vulnerable to crisis and shocks. Part of it is GDP per capita, but part of it might also be vulnerability, climate change, and things like that. So we started in very challenging settings, and we were in Nepal, in Bangladesh, Uganda, Tanzania at first, just sort of test and pilot everything. And then building from there, we've gone to more countries now. We've even been to Somalia. They contacted us and wanted to learn. Somaliland is a sort of more stable part of Somalia where we could do it, and it was quite interesting. We're working in countries like Gambia and Kenya in Africa, and we're now moving slowly into Latin America and the Caribbean, with Costa Rica being our first project country there. Lao PDR is another project country. So not necessarily the biggest, shining examples of infrastructure asset management, but very absorptive audiences that really understand that if they don't do that right, the immediate cost of it is just marginally so much more than when let's say Germany or Canada doesn't manage an asset properly, right?
There's no need to apologize for this, the size or type of country. We say that if you are a volunteer mayor in your rural community and you have a post office and a mayor's administrative building, a fire station and a police station, that's a really big portfolio for the volunteer mayor. So we only deal with, large groups of assets, because to everybody, what they have is big and important, and everybody can learn to manage it better.
And it's the blend of assets that we have too, because a lot of these countries, the major assets that we associate, like the roads, the electrical distribution systems, or perhaps some of the water distribution systems, are handled at the national level. But at the local level, you've got this real community-based consensus planning. And so you've got to take that into account. And so you'll be looking at your boreholes and access to boreholes versus piped water. The major cities may have piped water, but we're dealing with a lot of the smaller municipalities that where their roads are dirt roads. So they've got responsibility for the community roads, and then they've got these major paved roads going through them, and they've got to create that access, and how do they manage that with the one tractor that might break down? And so it's getting them, and they're great at thinking creatively. It's just providing that avenue, to that outlet for them to think creatively, about doing different stuff, of engaging the community for waste collection, so you can keep it out of the sewers, so that because they're all open sewers, so that they don't get clogged and you don't get flooding. So they have the solutions and the answers. It's just, oh, I'd never thought about doing that. Oh, wait, we know what we can do. We just need, we need some support in moving along that way.
Yes, and that's what our network tries to do. And that's why we're trying to help you get the word out about what you're doing, and try to expand it and let multinational corporations understand that they can be helpful by supporting the United Nations Asset Management Team. And we're actually actively trying to network. And so I'm happy to bring in Cecilia Mowat, who is president of Strategies Insight, an Asset Leadership Network member organization. Cecilia, can you tell us a little bit about what you have initiated?
In terms of what I've initiated in general, or in this context?
For the Colombian Embassy.
No, I don't want to do that in this setting. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
It's not appropriate.
All right, so
we have protocol, and at the UN, we all know the protocol. Until I have word, but let's put it this way. I can speak to, in general, the concept of what UN does, working with developing countries and the like, and the work of training your partners on the local ground is critical. And guess what? That's something that doesn't actually happen all over the world, in the developed world or in the developed multinational corporations. So the example that you provide and what is so exciting about the project that you guys have with this handbook and the workshops is the fact that indeed you are teaching people to fish. You're working with folks to help them. And when you said, Daniel, the ancillary benefit or the inherent benefit and tie of service benefit, the inherent link of service benefit, what are we doing anything for? We're doing it for people, for whether it's the residents, the employees, whosoever, whatsoever. And that service benefit of training people to acknowledge and recognize that they have an opportunity to optimize funding that they're going to use for their infrastructure, to mitigate risk. As you were talking about people coming up in front of the embassy or in front of the city hall and complaining, if you are working through the precepts that we look at ISO through ISO 55000, especially 4.2, that's one of my pet passions, considering the relevant stakeholders. When you do that, you are going to make a difference both in how you manage the process and who you're managing it with. And it sounds like you guys have really hit that nail on the head.
What is some of your training involved when you go into the countries?
Yeah, well, maybe we can answer this jointly, Linda, but we are following a pretty, established step-by-step approach now. We always start with applying a tool that we developed and refined over time, called a diagnostic tool. It's essentially a survey that Linda developed with a lot of structured questioning that results in some sort of scorecard where towns are now with asset management and where they could be realistically if they want to improve it. And that is sort of something we did ourselves at first, Linda and I, and now that we've been in many more countries, we're usually trying to hire national consultants. Linda trains them first in the application of that tool, and that takes applying it and traveling to at least 6, 7, 8 different cities. Can take a half a year and writing about it, and based on that, then we would develop a training curriculum. The biggest implementation point there is a workshop. So we do fly into the country, a week-long workshop with those local governments that we have assessed, potentially more if we have more resources. But imagine about sort of 6, 7, 8, sometimes even more. I think Uganda we had once 20 or so local governments present in a room, and each local government being presented by 4 or 5 people, sometimes 3 or 4. So you can get a big room, full of people, 60, 70, 80, 90, no problem. I think we had 120 once in Nepal. So it's not easy, of course, then, for one person like Linda to go through the training. But I'll hand it over to you, Linda. Maybe you talk a little bit about, the action plan we actually have them designed.
So we start off, and the diagnostic tool is great because I get the feedback from that, and that allows me to, we sort of have a set workshop that we deliver, and then that allows me to modify it and focus on certain areas where we think we need to zone in for that particular country. But we go through sort of chapters 1 and 2 of the handbooks, the basics, to get everybody on the same playing field when it comes to asset management. You acknowledge that some may know more than others. I mean, we talk about those pillars of asset management, and so obviously, the finance, those who are involved in finance know more about that side. But very few seem to know more about demand and life cycle management. So we cover all of that, and then that builds a basis that we can work on these action plans. So we briefly tell them about the diagnostic tool. This is why it happened, and this is what it comprises. And so you've got a sense of what happened when people came to your community to assess you, and then we get them to go back and look at that. And we go through these action plans, and really what the action plans are is just a very simple gap analysis for one of their assets. So that's the idea. We've got this basic knowledge. we've done this diagnostic, and part of that diagnostic is them telling us what they think their issues are. And then, the diagnostic tool also gives them some recommendations. So we look at that when we go into these action plans, and it was neat to hear you talk about stakeholders, Cecilia, because that's what we do. We go with them and we say, like, let's prioritize our assets. And that's always very interesting. Our priority asset is our computer systems. We go, well, let's think about what we mean by priority assets here, critical assets that, what happened, what's the impact if you didn't have that asset? Could that service be delivered? It's our schools. Well, you could still teach without a classroom. Maybe not on rainy days, but you could still teach without a classroom. So really getting them to think. And then they have to come up with, so we start to look at who the stakeholders are involved in those assets. Again, is that one of these challenges they have? Is that perhaps a gap, that communication? And so they go through this whole process and they develop a performance goal once they identify that asset, right? They develop this performance goal, and then that's how we do that gap analysis. And that's probably the most challenging thing for all of them. And I was always say to them, if you're having trouble identifying your performance measures, like what it is you want to measure, your goal's probably wrong. Because a lot of them really struggle and they don't have, we all hear the word SMART goals, but you say you want to be able to measure something. So what is it you want to measure? And so from that, they do this analysis, they look at the recommendations that the diagnostic tool said, and then they come up with just something really basic for one asset. And so it's kind of the, three of you are American, so it's the Missouri thing, right? I'm from Missouri, show me. It's, and so that's what it is, to try to say, well, look, here's this really simple little plan. It's not an asset management plan, it's an action plan. It's this simple gap analysis that now you can go back and see how it works. And when we do the presentation next week, we've got a whole collection of these now, these AMAPs, and Daniel will show where they are. But we've had some municipalities have been really creative in how they look at it, because the first thing they'll think about, right, they're coming in, asset management's about getting new stuff, right? And we go, no. The action plan isn't about new stuff. When you get to the end, maybe you need new stuff. But before you need new stuff, you got to figure out, what are you doing with the stuff you've got? So one of our, I still hold them up as an example. It was Tanga in Tanzania, and we've had some other really good ones too, but they started off saying they needed new garbage trucks. And we said, well, why? We pushed back on them and said, think about this. And they came out with an amazing plan. The very last thing they needed, like 10 steps down the road, was new garbage trucks. But they just reimagined their whole garbage collection system for their city, didn't they, Daniel? Just, based on going through that. So, it's amazing what you can get done in 3 or 4 days. We get squeezed sometimes. A lot of municipalities tell us they want less time, and we go, yeah. And that's when they come back to us afterwards and say we didn't have enough time.
So Linda, how is that? Oh, I'm sorry, Daniel, what were you going to say?
No. Exactly what Linda said. Like it's we've seen evaluations where they were asking for at least 3 weeks or even longer, to have that training. But at first, of course, they don't really know the issue and, how much time they want to dedicate to it. Just perhaps to just add one thing, like if you will already see that the approach we're doing is kind of the opposite direction, that, it's not so, if you're thinking about from ISO terms, like you're doing this policy work, right? You're like, what does it mean to have good asset management in place? And, I don't know yet what is the better approach, right? But we've seen countries wanting to adopt ISO standards on asset management, and really nothing happening on the ground as a result of that. What they really do is hire a consultant, to write a paper advising them what they need to do to, be compliant. But what you really want to do is you want to create better asset managers, right? With that. So what we're saying is, like, we're going to talk about policies and strategies a little bit, right? But the time in our training, the time that we have with Linda and some other instructors, we really want to be practical, and we really want to be action oriented, right? So we're starting with the action first, but, looking ahead, especially those that are doing a good job trying to implement those action plans, right? The next step would be really to widen that, right? Not one priority asset, but maybe 2, 3, 4, or maybe your entire asset portfolio as a city at some point. And then, maybe an asset management policy, I know that in Canada, I don't know if we have people from Canada here, right? But I think there's a big push to have pretty much all municipalities have an asset management policy in place. I don't know how it's done there. From what I hear, and I may be wrong, is that mostly money is being given to municipalities to hire consultants to write that policy. Does that really then lead to change? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, right? So the biggest challenge, of course, is always what happens after the training, and we've encountered many different challenges there as well. But what is positive is that everyone walks home with an agenda of things that they have to do, and they know if they're not doing it, they're not doing their homework. We can't force them, right? But it's very clear as to what the next steps are. And with having them to sort of design a policy, it might not be that clear, right? How that translates into day-to-day work. So that's sort of the approach that we are following now. But again, we'll see. I'm sure it can be refined and improved.
It's interesting that you said that, Daniel, because policies are something you put on a shelf, and implementation of strategies based on a policy is what we're looking for in asset management, at least at the ALN. And from what you are doing at the UN, you're bringing it down to a tactical thing, because people don't start doing something until it is related to what they have to do. And you have to make it relatable to what their goals and results are that they have to achieve. It's the same thing when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any of that, you have to boil it down to what does this group have to achieve? And having a policy is wonderful, and communicating that policy is wonderful, but if you're not implementing it, there's no point. Many organizations have policies, master plans for the municipalities that sit on a shelf and are not integrated into the operations of the departments. And what you're doing, from what I'm hearing, is actually forcing people to sit down in this workshop and this training and think about, how can I do this work? And what does this work mean for me? Excellent.
But one of the things that Cecilia said earlier that I really liked was that everything you're talking about is what we hear at every organization. It isn't different. And Linda talked about being able to pivot. And I was talking to one of your Canadian colleagues last week, Linda, and Paul said that everyone thinks they're unique and special. Well, they're about 20% unique, but 80% is the same at every organization everywhere in the world. And your ability to pivot is because so much is the same. Can you talk about how you pivoted and how you used your foundation to talk about healthcare?
Yeah, this was, so you're talking about the COVID chapter that came into the book. It, because we had developed the AMAPs ahead of time, because we had looked at this process and talked to them about how you prioritize infrastructure, we'd said to them, this is something you can use for anything. And it may be that at certain points in time, your critical infrastructure is going to change. And so when we came back, and this happened in our online workshops, if I remember correctly, because we had our public health session in those online workshops, that like the big, massive ones we held, is that you can still use that AMAP process. What has changed is you have now redefined what that critical infrastructure is. Maybe it is now your hospital equipment, your lab equipment. You can still follow that same process. And so now what you are doing is you've got a new critical asset. You're going to develop, a new goal for that, and new performance measures, and you're going to identify what you need to do for that asset. It doesn't mean that you take the old AMAP and you throw it away, but you've now got another one that is current, and just do the same thing. And so it was just very easy to make that pivot, and that had never been in you. I shouldn't say it was intentional, it wasn't, but the good thing about how the AMAP was constructed was that we were able to do that and say to them, just use this tool again and see what your issues are, and use that process to help you figure out, how you're going to deal with these issues with your medical equipment, for example. I mean, it does, at the time of COVID, you're not going to get a new hospital built, but certainly some of those other critical assets that were more tangible, you could work through. So and now, as we've gone back post-COVID, we're getting back into the more classic infrastructure, but you want to say, we now start to think about resiliency. What have we learned from those 3 years of COVID? And so how do we adapt what we've done? How do we make sure that what happened during COVID, or if we did have to get new equipment, we can make sure that it's sustainable for the future. So it's kind of building all those principles in that we learn as we go, but I think it shows it's a good foundation that's been built that we can adapt it.
So I misspoke earlier because I'm excited about our networking efforts to help you get the word out. And we've got a question that kind of follows in that. So there's a question about working with the U.S. National Institute of Building Sciences, and it's specific about tying building information management standards to operational lifecycle goals. And I'm going to start off by saying that we want to help you connect. If there is something there, if you're interested in building information model standards that the National Institute of Building Sciences has, our Platinum organizational member, Onuma Inc., is actively involved in it. We will bring you to them, or the information to you. But so how do you connect with other standards groups or organizations? You referenced the Institute of Asset Management, maybe other organizations also. David or Daniel?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this network is really growing as we speak, right? So we're coming from the UN perspective. So the immediate networking I had to do was within the UN to make sure that those agencies and organizations that have a stake in this type of project are at least consulted or better, integrated into it. So, what we did there is, look at, I work at UNDESA. UNDESA is a Department of Economic and Social Affairs in New York, has a small budget for technical assistance, but better known for, these big sort of conference and summits and the SDGs and things like that. So I knew that, like in order to have a country impact, I needed to team up with people on the ground. So the first, colleagues I turned to were our country offices and agencies that work at the local government level. We have different agencies that do that, and one is called the United Nations Capital Development Fund, and they do really interesting work at trying to sort of bridge that last mile of finance, going into financing very small infrastructure and very small things that usually the private sector is not so interested in, or not even the public sector, and they're very creative models of doing that. But they had the network to all the different local governments we want to work on, and they could see that what we're doing will help them, right? I mean, it's like, so it makes their investments more sustainable. Within UN, we have other organizations like UNOPS. It's essentially the contractual arm of the UN. It started out like that. It's become bigger than that now, but they really do the infrastructure engineering work on the ground. So we brought them in. UN Habitat, of course. So that really takes a long time. And then you go out and look at the other aid agencies that are active in the country, right? We're not working in the US, yeah. We're working in Tanzania, Somalia, Gambia. So the policy setter, the one in charge is, of course, the government. The national government, right? But there's a big ecosystem of very, very important players, from the World Bank to the different regional development banks, that are part of that as well, right? And they have massive infrastructure investments, and we want to make sure they are part of it. We're trying to get the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank involved. We even have the handbook in Chinese, because the Chinese government thought it would be really helpful for some of their very poor local governments way out in the West, right? So it's more of that type of networking which keeps us busy. And I should also say, like right now, there's 2 staff members working on this at the UN, 2. Plus a group of very, very dedicated consultants that go above and beyond. So we have a team of a few consultants in each country, and then we have a team of instructors that's sort of led by Linda. But as we go into different language settings, we're also bringing in other experts like that. But the next step, and that's why I'm excited about this connection that we have, right, is we want to build something like a brain trust at the UN. We want to have a group of sort of cutting edge thinkers on this, but not just ISO, but really like on how to use these principles effectively in very challenging circumstances in developing countries. People that are open to really rethink it in a new setting, in a new environment. And that's why we're reaching out. We're being reached out to, of course, because this becomes more known. The universities are a big factor. I mean, it's the University of Rotterdam contacted us. They've taught the AMAPs to their students, they are interested in developing a joint course. They're helping us in countries, in Kenya, for example, to put this course there into a national context. New York University, we've been working with Columbia University. We have a fantastic relationship with, of course, because they're also in New York. But for the last 5 years, students there that do their masters in public administration have done capstone projects with us. Really doing very, very concrete case studies, like things like a great project in Kuala Lumpur where they have a tunnel that goes through the city that doubles as a drainage system when there's flooding, and so they really took this apart and interviewed everyone, made videos about it, and we showcased that on our website, to be shared with others. So this is a growing effort to build that network, and we're nowhere near where we could be.
Well, we want to help. One of our ALN senior fellows who is on the call, Marty Rowlands, is a special guest editor for the American Journal of Economics and Sociology. And so we'll make a connection and see what we can write up about what you have done and get that published. And that will give some more weight to what you've done. Last week we had a presentation on ports, and our members who were involved in the Rotterdam port. It's the first port in the world that was ISO 55001 certified. So if you have any port projects or any countries with ports and that's an issue, we can bring in and contribute to your training workshops there. And I am very grateful for your time and everyone's time. This is a really unique program because the number of people have increased as the program has gone on and nobody's left. So everyone's really interested in what you're doing. And I'm calling out to all the attendees to tell your friends, to get your multinational corporations to pay attention to this and consider how to partner with the UN to get this out further. There's so much opportunity. There's so much need. We say, or one thing that can be said is that we're facing a world of problems together as a single human race. And it seems crazy to think that any one thing can help everybody in the world. But if every organization improves the management of their assets, we may have a chance. We may not, but we haven't heard anything as clearly and concisely stated as what was just said. So we're running full speed ahead with asset management until somebody else comes up with something better.
Right. And I would just piggyback on what you're saying, Michael, because what Linda said earlier, she has the passion for simplifying asset management. And what you always tell me about ISO 55000, and when you hooked me into becoming involved in this, was that it's just a checklist, a to-do list, and it's simple. But one of the things that we have to think about is that people don't always see something that is labeled technically ISO with a number as being easy and simple. And so at ALN, we welcome anything that is going to be helpful for people to understand and digest the concept. Because what we're all about is creating a mindfulness to really manage the assets that are going to enable you as an organization to achieve your mission, whatever those assets are, tangible or intangible, with a major focus on the intangible relationship assets being the critical one to bring things together to make a difference. So we're excited for next week. Mike, can you tell us more about that? Because I know you're trying to wrap
Well,
up.
next week is a full hour program, and it will be a presentation. There will be slides, but there will also be discussion. So that's why we're encouraging everyone to come back and bring colleagues, and it's scheduled for an hour. So be prepared ahead of time, and we always know how to sneak in overtime if things are going well. So Linda and Daniel, if you'd like to make any closing statements.
Just to
Or
thank you, Mike, and the the whole ALN just for reaching out to us. And I know it's not always super easy to get hold of us. It's a small team, and we spend a lot of time on airplanes and trying to do the workshops and fundraise at the same time. But as you said, this is such a critical issue, and we're pulling on the same strings here. So really, really happy about this collaboration. Looking forward to next week and what comes beyond. And yeah, whatever you mentioned in terms of publicizing it, including that the journal article or other innovative ideas, we're all ears.
And thank you for this great venue, and then for all of the participants that have stayed on as we've gone a little bit over time. We're looking forward to engaging with you next week.
excellent. So I want to share my screen and just formally thank you, and look forward to seeing you again next week. And then thank our platinum member who I mentioned is involved with the National Institute of Building Sciences, and our patron members, Jacobs Engineering, they're global. We're trying to get them involved with you. ABS Quality Evaluations, Definitive Logic, CGI, and all of our organizational members. Very thankful for their support for this kind of really dynamic program. So thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see you all next week. Bye for now.
Be well, take care. Thank you, guys. Keep up the good work.